Imagine waking up at 2 in the morning and your entire house is completely silent. No fan, no air conditioning, no hum from the refrigerator, just darkness and silence. You walk to the window and realize it's not just your house, it's your entire street. Every single neighbor, pitch black as far as you can see. You grab your phone, 14% battery, and search for what happened. And the answer that comes back is short, cold, and deeply unsettling. Grid overload. Now, let me ask you something. Do you think that's a third world problem? Something that only happens in places with old infrastructure and no investment? Because the data says something completely different. And what that data is showing right now should be making headlines every single day. But it's not. And that silence, that's exactly what worries me most. Over the last decade, electricity demand in the United States has been climbing at a pace the grid was never designed to handle. We're talking about millions of vehicles being plugged in every night, entire cities of data centers running 24 hours a day to power artificial intelligence, heating systems being converted from gas to electric, and an aging infrastructure that, in many regions, hasn't been meaningfully updated since the 1970s. The wires are the same, the transformers are the same, but the demand is nothing like it used to be. And here's what most people don't realize. When the grid gets pushed to its limits, it doesn't just go dark dramatically like in the movies. It starts to crack quietly. You see it in the small things first. Brownouts that dim your lights for a few seconds. Appliances that behave strangely. Utility bills that seem to spike for no obvious reason. And then one day, during a heat wave or a cold snap or just an ordinary Tuesday when demand peaks, it fails. Not because something exploded, but because the system simply couldn't keep up anymore. In the summer of 2023, grid operators across multiple states issued emergency alerts asking residents to reduce their electricity use during peak hours. In Texas, California, and parts of the Southeast, people were being told, by the utilities themselves, to turn off their air conditioning in the middle of summer heat. Think about that for a second. The companies that sell you electricity were asking you not to use it because the system couldn't handle the load. And this isn't getting better. The Department of Energy has projected that electricity demand in the US could increase by as much as 20% over the next decade. Meanwhile, the investment needed to modernize the grid is estimated in the trillions, with a T, and it's moving at the speed of government bureaucracy, which means the gap between what the grid can deliver and what people actually need is going to keep widening, slowly, quietly, until it isn't quiet anymore. Now, I want to stop here for just a second, because I know some of you are already thinking about this from a personal standpoint. You're thinking about your family, about what happens if the power goes out for more than a few hours, about the food in your fridge, the medication that needs refrigeration, the kids who need to sleep with a fan in the summer. And if that's you, if you've already started wondering what your options are, there's actually a link in the comments below this video that a lot of people in this community have been looking at lately. It's not something I'm pushing on you. But if you're curious about what some families are doing to reduce their dependence on the grid before things get worse, it might be worth a few minutes of your time. Just something to keep in mind as we keep going. Because the story gets more interesting from here. What's happening right now isn't just a matter of supply and demand. There's a structural problem buried inside the way the American grid was built that most people have never heard of. And it makes everything I just described significantly worse. The grid was designed around a central distribution model. Big power plants generate electricity. It travels through long transmission lines, gets stepped down through substations, and eventually reaches your home. That model made sense in 1950. But in 2024, it creates a critical vulnerability that engineers have been quietly warning about for years. When one part of that long chain fails, and they do fail more often than the utilities want to admit, the Disruption doesn't stay local, it cascades. A transformer failure in one state can create pressure on neighboring states. A cyber attack on a single substation can affect hundreds of thousands of homes. And extreme weather events, which are becoming more frequent and more intense, can knock out multiple points of that chain simultaneously. The grid isn't just aging, it's fragile in ways that weren't even possible to predict when it was first designed. There was a man I read about, a retired electrical engineer from Georgia, spent over 30 years working for one of the major utility companies. When he retired, he gave an interview to a small regional newspaper, and he said something that stuck with me. He said, "I've seen what this grid looks like from the inside, and I would never, not for a single day, rely on it as my only source of power." A man who spent his entire career building and maintaining the system didn't trust the system. Let that sink in. And here's the part that I think is genuinely important for you to understand. The people who are most vulnerable when the grid fails are not the people who are furthest from power plants. They're the people who are most dependent, the families who have no backup, no plan, no alternative, because when the lights go out for a few hours, it's an inconvenience. When it goes out for a few days, it's a crisis. And the difference between those two outcomes for your family has nothing to do with the utility company. It has everything to do with the choices you make before it happens. That's why the conversation that's been growing around energy independence isn't just for preppers or off-grid enthusiasts anymore. Regular people, homeowners, renters, families in suburbs and cities are starting to look at their relationship with the grid differently, not with panic, not with paranoia, but with the kind of quiet, practical intelligence that says, "I would rather have options than not have them." Some of these people are making small changes, others are going further. But the common thread is this: they're not waiting for the utility company to fix a problem that, honestly, the utility company has every incentive to downplay. They're taking a small, personal step toward having something in place before the next heat wave, the next storm, the next Tuesday when the demand peaks and the system just can't keep up. If you want to see what some of those steps actually look like, practically, affordably, without turning your life upside down, the link in the comments is worth checking out. It's not a perfect solution for everyone. But for a lot of people watching this right now, it might be exactly the kind of thing that makes the difference between being caught off guard and being quietly, calmly prepared. The grid is under pressure. That's not a conspiracy theory. That's a fact that utility executives, energy analysts, and former engineers are all saying out loud, just not loudly enough for most people to hear. What you do with that information is entirely up to you. But now you know, and knowing is always the first step. If this video made you think, share it with someone who should probably be thinking about this too. And I'll see you in the next one.